Welcome to the Biblical Languages Podcast, brought to you by Biblingo. I am Kevin Grasso, your host for this episode, and I'm excited to talk with Dr. Rob Plummer today about biblical Greek pedagogy. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Great to be here, Kevin. Thanks for inviting me.
So, just a little bit about Rob Plummer. He is the Colin and Evelyn Aikman Professor of Biblical Studies at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He is a biblical scholar with a missionary heart. He has served in missionary assignments of varying length in China, Israel, Trinidad, Ghana, Malaysia, Cuba, and Turkey. Plummer has written, co-written, or edited several books, including Greek for Life, Strategies for Learning, Retaining, and Reviving New Testament Greek, Going Deeper with New Testament Greek, an intermediate study of the grammar and syntax of the New Testament, Held in Honor, Wisdom for Your Marriage from Voices of the Past, and 40 Questions about Interpreting the Bible. Plummer is perhaps most widely known for his role in founding and hosting the screencast The Daily Dose of Greek at www.dailydoseofgreek.com, which we will discuss a little bit more in this episode. So, I think the first thing that I'd like to talk about is you've actually been teaching Greek in a seminary context for around 20 years. So maybe you can just talk about your experience. So what are some of the biggest strengths in biblical language pedagogy in that context, and some weaknesses, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Kevin. It's a difficult question to answer because there's so many different manifestations of teaching Greek, right? Someone can go to one seminary and have a fabulous experience. Someone can go to another seminary, have a very negative. And even within the same school, someone could have a very positive versus negative experience. I mean, one of the benefits I would say of the seminary is many of them are still requiring Greek and Hebrew. We can be grateful for that. I am shocked and saddened when I encounter people who go to prominent and well-known seminaries and divinity schools who have not had Greek and Hebrew. It is shocking to me. Maybe it shouldn't be, especially if you think of some of the schools that have gone more liberal or mainline. Once you leave the authority of Scripture, it doesn't really matter what it says in the original so much anymore, right? It doesn't really matter what the author intended because your authority is no longer the Word of God. But for those, it saddens me, especially for conservative schools that are doing that. I think one of the strengths of the seminary in biblical languages is it's part of the curriculum many times, and so students are forced to do it even though they might not want to. And hopefully it's in that context where they are infected with a passion. I've seen many students who are taking Greek because they have to, and then when they're done with the class, they want to. And that's a win. That's what we want. Certainly, if you look across all Bible colleges and seminaries, there are places where there's people going through the motions. There's not a passion, but you can find that in other subjects too, not just in Greek and Hebrew. And so that saddens me in any subject when a teacher has lost their passion or is just going through the motions, or where they dumb down stuff. I really am not a fan of schools where they're like, well, they're going to lose it anyway, so let's just teach them to use a Bible software program. I really just do not think that's a good idea, and we all know how dangerous someone is with almost no knowledge and a Bible software program. So I think, to be honest, I think it's never been a more exciting time right now to be learning and teaching Greek and Hebrew with the technology we have, with the camaraderie. I mean, I love what you guys are doing at Biblingo. I feel like I can learn a lot from your communicative language. I've referenced students to what you're doing. I think for people who want to collaborate, I think it's the next couple of decades are going to be really exciting. There are little pockets of people who don't want to collaborate with other people and think they're the only game in town, and whether that's traditional or more communicative, and I think that's also a sad thing is where people don't seem like they want to learn and cooperate with other people.
Yeah, and I mean it is interesting. I feel like there is just this growing interest in Greek and Hebrew in one respect, but then also, as you point out, there are lots and lots of seminaries that are just dropping it all together. So it seems to be I mean, really, like a lot of other things today, very polarizing. Some people are getting really into it. There are new resources coming out that are really great. And then on the other end of the spectrum, some people are saying, we don't really need it anymore.
It's totally strange. Yeah, you're exactly right to compare it to the polarizing things we see in broader culture. But I do think, I find, of course, traditional seminary education is in some ways, if you just look at the broad numbers, is in decline. People like, well, I just start working at my church, or I can do all that online. I don't really want to go to a brick and mortar school. But I do feel like one of the draws of a more traditional theological education is the mentoring you get in Greek and Hebrew. Now, you get very good instruction online, for sure, but that forced look the professor in the eye in the classroom 3 days a week, that's good for most students.
Yeah, well, and take a test, you get graded for it.
Yeah, the day of judgment comes regularly through quizzes and tests, and that's for most students that accountability and the presence of not just having it on your Google Calendar, but actually having to sit in a classroom in front of someone and interact with them. Most people find that desirable and helpful, and I do think the seminaries and Bible colleges that are doing that are valuing biblical languages, it's actually going to be one of the things that helps them prosper and distinguishes them as living and growing and prospering schools in the future.
Yeah, for sure. So given all of that, what you mentioned earlier, collaboration, right, being a big part of how we can, more collaboration, we can improve in the field in that way. Are there any other ways you think we can improve just in general as a field in the biblical language pedagogy arena?
Well, I'm always on a journey of improvement. I feel like I don't think that I have arrived in any of my teaching or preaching, and we want to have that kind of humility. There are these books out. There's one, Small Teaching, about incremental changes and things you can do in your teaching to improve it. We could write one about small Greek teaching. There are small incremental changes people can make, but to be fair, there are also some larger changes that it's hard to jump from this method to a completely different method, or incorporating in a method someone's not familiar with. So I think, honestly, a challenge to you guys. I really, when I completed my beginning grammar with Ben Merkel, and I told you guys, if you guys want to make a flashcard deck that matches that, you're very accommodating, and it makes me want to review people to you and see how. So I appreciate that sort of like, how can we begin to incorporate more communicative language into a traditional pedagogy where most students are running from class to a job. They don't have time to sit around and speak Greek all week. Most students don't. So how can those things be incorporated more incrementally and maybe more optionally, like to have an optional track maybe or lab for people who do have time and interest to grow in that way?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think we'll touch more on this later, just, how we can really weld, these two kinds of approaches together, because, and this is something that we totally believe at Biblingo. It's just that they're complementary, and you can definitely do both, more of the, traditional talking about grammar, and also, learning to speak a language, which really is a different skill, at the end of the day. So let's talk a little bit about, before we get to that, your two grammars. So, past year you published, the introductory grammar and the intermediate grammar. So I think the obvious question, you were probably one of several introductory grammars that were published last year, Greek grammar. So what's different about this book? And why do we need another introductory grammar?
But when you buy this book, I get 50 cents. So if you buy several of them, I can buy a hamburger. No, just teasing.
Only at McDonald's, though.
And of course, I should point out the introductory grammar is co-authored with Ben Merkel, right, who actually initiated it. So it wouldn't. We need to give him full credit for that. And then the intermediate grammar, which is this is a second edition. The first edition came out about 5 years ago. Is co-authored with Andreas Kostenberger and Ben Merkel. So, I mean, what is different about them? I would say for the beginning grammar, probably the most distinguishing aspect is the website beginninggreek.com. So it has a website tied with it that has overview videos for each chapter, that has all kinds of songs and memory devices, that has OneNote files with all the charts preloaded, that has PowerPoints, that has links to you guys, links to lots of free flashcards. I mean, it's just this huge dump of information. In fact, many other unnamed grammars will say that if you were to purchase workbook, videos, all these kinds of stuff, it would cost hundreds of dollars. The most recent, they've been selling the intro grammar on Amazon for $26. So, I mean, you can't get a better deal than that. It's integrated very much in with some good resources, video resources, and other free things to help students learn. The grammar is written with an attention to reading the Greek New Testament. So from the first translation to the end, the students are translating from the Greek New Testament. So there's a joy of reading the Word of God. It incorporates into the book the vocabulary, the workbook, the answer key, charts, all that is in there together. So you don't have to buy 2 or 3 other things. The book also has sections dealing with text criticism, with use of commentaries, with word studies. All that's incorporated into the book. You don't have to buy other small paperbacks or things. It's up to date and clear in its discussion of grammatical categories with lots of examples from the New Testament about where it really matters. So, I've found that even though we're just discussing middle voice, verbal aspect, the nuances of the perfect, some of these things that have reached greater clarity in scholarship in recent years, we're bringing that to students at the very beginning of their study, and I think they're grasping it. We're explaining it clearly. So I get good feedback from people that the grammar is useful and they find it clear and helpful, and it's helping them learn. So. And the intermediate grammar is similar. It incorporates all the vocabulary, workbook, reading stuff. There's a website, deepergreek.com, for that has all kinds of free things as well.
Yeah, I think you point out some really helpful things here. And one of the things that was interesting to me is some of the sections on more practical things. So you talk about, there's a section on textual criticism, word study tools, sentence diagramming. So it seems like trying to help students use their Greek, right? Rather than just talk about, the Greek. So can you tell us a little bit more about these sections? Like, what was your thinking in including these? And I know in the intermediate grammar, you actually wrote several of these chapters.
Well, when Ben and I and Andreas for the intermediate, when we were sitting around talking about what we wanted in the grammar, we really wanted a one-stop shopping experience where the students and the professor didn't have to piece together and get, okay, this book on vocabulary and this book on to introduce students on text criticism, but to have that all in one place. Just students buy one textbook. There's a reliable discussion that's up to date on these different issues, because it's hard, honestly, to get an up to date, clear, aimed at beginning and intermediate discussion. Intermediate students on like text criticism, to explain traditional vocabulary, so 90% of the professors who still explain it that way feel comfortable, but also to explain coherence-based genealogical method and what is the editio critica maior and how is all this changing. And so we wanted that to be just clear and reliable in one place. And I think it's meeting a need. It basically reflected the things that we wanted to have in our classes, our beginning and intermediate classes. Before we wrote this textbook, I used to have a little book on text criticism, book on vocabulary, but we're going to get that all in one place.
Right. Well, and I think one sort of like question, and maybe this is why something like word studies hasn't been incorporated into textbooks before, is that it's not always clear why you would even need to know Greek to do it. So let's say, for example, you have a Bible software and you can just look for all of the words, every occurrence of, I don't know, whatever you want, agape, and then you can see, okay, you see a translation on one side, you see the Greek text on the other. You can't read Greek, but if you looked for the word, right, it's the right word. So why do you think, if you just know how to do a word study, for example, in a Bible software, why do you think you need to take the extra step to really learn Greek, right, in that sense?
Well, I don't have to convince you of the answer.
Right. You don't have to convince me, but maybe someone else.
I know. That's a fair question. It's like the student who said, my pastor told me I don't have to learn Greek because we have Strong's Concordance, and I was like, okay, well, find somebody who's actually learned Greek, who doesn't think that it was worth their time, rather than somebody who hasn't learned Greek and then tells you that you should be like them. Right. Well, one, at the most basic level, the best linguistic resources are not written for people who don't know the language, right? So the best lexicons, just even BDAG, and what people call Brildag, and Little Scott, using the best lexicons. And even though it's accessible, Silva, New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology and Exegesis, the ED&T, these resources ultimately assume some level of linguistic knowledge of the original languages. And if you don't have that knowledge, you're handicapped. Mm-hmm. And you can't really follow always what's being said or why, and you're prone to missteps and to misunderstandings and misrepresentations, I think. Most people don't really understand. We use language, this well, but we don't really think about how we use it and how to the etymological fallacy, illegitimate totality, transfer, all these word study fallacies that people encounter through teaching and preaching, well-meaning teaching and preaching, maybe from people who love Jesus and who have even led them to faith in Christ and taught them. But when you think more carefully about language, you realize that those things are missteps. And even the idea that you could just someone does it, they're like, I'm going to learn everything about God's love in the Bible. They agape, click. There I have it. You're like, well, do you know there are other words about love. There are many times the verb phileo, for example, is used in relation to God's love, and it doesn't mean it's any less than some form of agape. And there are many passages that speak about God's love that use neither, no word derived from those roots. And so you have the concept of love. So just helping people think more carefully about concepts and guide, it's I find that students, when they read that chapter on word studies, it makes sense to them. They maybe couldn't have put it in words beforehand, but they're like, yeah, I get that, and I see why that other way is wrong. And in class, I like to illustrate it with examples from English, and people see how absurd it is when you do the same thing in English. I mean, you're like, so and so stepped out with his cell phone. A cell is a blob of protoplasm. A cell is a square in an Excel word, spreadsheet. A cell is a small jail room where someone is incarcerated. How rich is this brother's phone? It has, and you're like, no, of course not. Words have a range of meaning, and the hard work of reading a text carefully is paying attention to the context to know the nuance intended by the author at that place.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think something that we can do a much better job just in the field of educating people on the nature of language. And this is something that, a lot of students in introductory Greek or Hebrew classes, they realize for the first time, oh, I never knew what nominative case was. Even though in English, we have I versus me, but we don't, as native speakers, we don't necessarily know how to analyze our own language. We just know how to use it, right? And it's actually a different skill, to be able to look at a language and to analyze it. is just a different animal.
I'm going to get up and grab something off the shelf here real quick if I can find it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if I can. I'm looking for that book that just came out about English grammar. There it is. You may, I don't know, since you were in Israel, if you know this book because it just came out, but it's published by Kyle Greenwood, Dictionary of English Grammar for Students of Biblical Languages. And
I've not seen this.
Yeah, you should. It's a great little book, and it's for students who, like you say, English speakers, many of them native English speakers, who for the first time are really understanding the structure of their own language and some of the features of it. But the benefit of this, it not only gives the English definition, but then it gives an example in Greek and in Hebrew with, translation and very clear formatting, highlighted words, and it's a great little book.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. So I just along those lines in the in the word study chapter, just want to take a look at it just a little bit. And we've touched on some of these things, but you say this in the main section, or in the beginning of the main section. You say, never in the history of the world has there been less need for Greek word studies than in 21st century English-speaking North America. And I think what you mean by that, right, is there's so many translations.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they're great. We have great English Bible translations. Yeah.
Right. So I guess the one question would be, okay, for a student, just like really practically, how... So I have BDAG, right? I've taken a few semesters of Greek. What is my goal when I'm doing a word study? Am I trying to build on BDAG and say something new that they haven't said, or am I trying to use BDAG responsibly? By trying to figure out like which sense in a certain context is being activated. Like what is my actual goal when I'm doing a word study?
Well, I would say it would depend on why you're doing the word study, right?
Sure.
One of the reasons that we do word studies is because sometimes the language of the translation is antiquated or unclear, for example. Though I like the ESV translation. I like it very much. It is intentionally in the line of the KJV and the RSV and all that. And so sometimes the language is it's not normal English, ordinary, colloquial, everyday English. We looked at a passage, I think it was from Luke 24. I may be remembering incorrectly here, but about Jesus warning them as they're waiting for his return to not be weighed down with dissipation. Mm-hmm. If you ask any modern English speaker, what is dissipation? They're going to probably look puzzled, and they may, if they think about it, dissipation. I guess that's where like steam is sort of escaping from a room or something. It's dissipating, It's a word, krypale. It occurs one time in the New Testament. It occurs numerous places outside the New Testament. It's interesting when you click, again, with Bible software, click in Philo. It's the term that's used when Lot, his daughters, after they escape from Sodom and Gomorrah, they get him drunk and sleep with him, right? Incest is described as krypale. It's drunkenness and the immoral behavior associated with it, which involves sexual exploitation and violence. And so it just, taking the time to look it up, and now you're like, oh, now I know what this means.
Right.
So it would depend. Now it might be a term that, justification, someone's very familiar with, and they think they're familiar with, but they want to understand, again, dikaiosune, or righteousness, dikaios, righteous, can have nuances of meaning. For example, Joseph is described as a righteous man. He did not want to expose Mary to public disgrace and divorce her, bring her into disrepute through divorcing her publicly. Well, I don't think Matthew is contradicting with Paul, where Paul tells us that no one is righteous, right? It's how do we get the nuance of that? Obviously, Joseph in a comparative way, in a practical and comparative way, We might say like a pastor, he's a good man. I trust him. You don't go, the Bible says no one is good. No, not one. You understand the context. Both are true. No one is good. And you can still call a pastor a good man in a comparative and practical sense. So it's just coming to a deeper understanding maybe of that term in the context. It could be because the translation uses antiquated or potentially unclear things. Yeah, I tell students, if you're reading English translations and they differ, for pastors, they're very practical level. I've taught some classes at like pastors conference. I say, hey, if you pull out 3 English translations, they differ. That's somewhere maybe you need to go deeper in the language and see why do they differ. Example, the book of Philemon, I think it's verse 8, maybe 6, I'm not sure. It says, the old NIV says, I pray you may be active in sharing your faith so you have a knowledge of every good thing we have in Christ. Well, I've even seen that used by a large, prominent ministry pastor about evangelism. But it's the word koinonia, and the whole book of Philemon is not about evangelism. It's about forgiveness and reconciliation and partnership within the body of Christ, which koinonia more naturally means. And so if your Pew Bible says sharing your faith, but then you notice, wait, why is it different? Why does it say partnership of the faith here? And why does it say, fellowship of the faith? To explore what that means. And then I'm a big fan in my class as a professor of trying to teach students to speak respectfully and responsibly about translation. So I say, if your Pew Bible says sharing your faith, don't go out there and be like, they NIV 84 messed it up again. Make yourself the Pope of Bible translations. It's better to go in and say, when we read this, we have to confess we might think of evangelism, sharing. But there's different kinds of sharing. There's sharing with outsiders, there's sharing with insiders. And this is talking about not sharing the gospel, but sharing the fruit of the gospel with other believers in forgiveness and love, and, nuance it in that way and bring in other translations in a respectful way that doesn't undermine the congregation's right trust. They have a right trust, a correct trust in the good English translations we have.
Yeah, and that's a really good point of really there's an ambiguity being introduced into the English version that really isn't there in the Greek. And I think that's just, one reason why, like, you really do have to, at the very least, look at multiple translations, when you're doing these kinds of things, because the assumption would be that the translators understood actually what Paul was saying, right? They chose something in English that could be misunderstood, right? But their intention was probably not sharing your faith with others, right? In the way that we think of evangelism. And so I think that is one of the big things with word studies is us coming to a better understanding of the Greek and then figuring out, okay, then how do I convey this same idea in my language more accurately? Because I've found that a lot of times that it's a separate question, but it's also a question that shouldn't just be taken for granted, right? Just because you're a native speaker of English doesn't mean that you will automatically know the correct word from Greek into your language.
Totally. And because I'm teaching students who are going to be pastors and missionaries and women leaders in the church, as teaching women's conferences, I want them to not always feel that they need to come out with the Greek. I say Greek is like underwear. It should provide support but not be visible, usually. And so, for example, 1 John 1:5, God is light and in him there is no darkness at all. It's a double negative. None darkness is not in him, But rather than talking about, there's a double negative in Greek, it's emphatic, I think the way you say, this is so, how do you put this in the context of your, say, God is holy and pure, and there's not even like a little nanoparticle of evil in him at all. And you own the truth that's being conveyed by that, and then you comes out through your passion and through your exhortation, and you feel confident doing that because you're reflecting what's in the text. You're not just like, I'm excited about this, or this will make a good point. It's like what the text is emphasizing,
Yeah. Well, and two, just to say it's a double negative or emphatic, like actually doesn't mean very much. It does mean something if you understand it well enough to put it into your language, then, in a way that everyone else would understand, that's when you've got it, right? Which is a different question again.
Hey, this is Nick with Biblingo, and I hope you're enjoying this podcast series on biblical language pedagogy. If you're a teacher, faculty, or a student that would like to see these pedagogical principles implemented at your institution, then we have a special event for you. On May 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we're hosting a webinar called How to Enhance Your Biblical Language Program with Biblingo. We'll show you how you can leverage these proven language learning methods in your biblical language program using the Biblingo software and our supplemental resources. Click the link in the description or go to biblingo.org/webinar to register for the event.
So you also wrote the chapter, just kind of switching gears here, going back to more like higher level things. You wrote the chapter on continuing with Greek, and you note that many students commit, you call it apostasy from Greek after seminary. So why do you think that's the case? I mean, why do you think people, and we all hear these stories of, I did Greek in seminary, 5 years down the line, I don't remember anything I learned. I don't really use it. So what's the issue here?
Well, there could be several things. I mean, it could be laziness. I think it often is. Someone would rather watch Netflix than read the Bible, or read it in Greek and Hebrew. Busyness. Pastors, people in ministry are extremely busy. So I don't want to criticize all of them, but it's true that many of them, just trying to juggle, get the messages ready, do the funerals, do the weddings, be with their family, and it just gets crowded out. One of the problems there is they never learn to incorporate it into their devotions and their regular ministry preparation. Because if it's incorporated in, then that would be part of the busyness, but it might actually streamline and make them more efficient, right? So that they would be, rather than having to take the text filtered through commentaries and translations, they would have that focused work on it themselves. I think there are many possible explanations. I find that most students who do commit Greek apostasy feel bad about it. They're not proud about it. I mean, they know they should have stayed in the text. They want to come back to it. Some of them go through great efforts to regain what they have lost. I mean, that's similar. Why are 70% of Americans obese or overweight? Well, it's the easy road. I mean, it's a lot easier to pull through the McDonald's drive-through and just, it's a lot easier to sit there on the couch than it is to get up and exercise. And so I'm afraid that the easy road for many people is to let the Greek and Hebrew slide. And that's something that I've tried to fight against. And when I was, I'll turn 50 in about a month. But when I was in my mid-40s, I'd sort of sat back and thought, what have I not accomplished? What do I want to do? And besides driving a Mazda, no, just kidding. Besides getting one of those little BMW sports cars, I'm teasing. No, that was not my midlife crisis. I drive a 2009 Toyota Corolla. But I thought, I'm happy about the passion God's given me to incite in people a love for the biblical languages and to see them using them and progressing in them. But what I feel sad about is this Greek apostasy, running into people 5 years later, 10 years later, and not seeing it incorporated into their ministry the way I like. And so that's why I started the Daily Dose of Greek, to try to develop the daily habit of reading the Greek New Testament and help people come back and develop that habit, or return to that habit, resurrect that ability. And so.
Well, that's an interesting point. So do you think, I mean, so your perspective, right, is you see there's an issue, and what I heard you say is, a lot of it is the student's fault with motivation, right? I mean, just not making part of the routine, right? Self-discipline, all those things. But you come along and you say, okay, how do we fix this problem? I'm going to give you resources that make it easier to do that, right? So from a pedagogical standpoint, what do you think, teachers can do to help their students, be set up to where they're not doing that, right? So at the end of the day, and you pointed this out as well, just that students actually do want to know Greek. I think by and large, the people that I've talked to, Greek and Hebrew are very exciting classes for them in the beginning, and then they realize what it's all about and how it's hard, and they get bogged down, and then it becomes not as exciting. But it's still, but I think the idea of reading the text in the original language with fluency is a very exciting thing, right? So how do you think we can help teachers motivate students in that way?
Yeah, I think the most effective Greek and Hebrew teachers maybe need to own the fact that they're not just language teachers, but they're life coaches for habits, right? This is a kind of a big field now, atomic habits and, the nudge theory and all this kind of stuff. How do we behavioral psychology, behavioral economics? How do we get ourselves and get other people to do things that we want to do? And now let's not give up the farm to secular psychology. I mean, I believe in the person of the Holy Spirit, and I believe He empowers us and motivates us. But we're also human people, like in flesh, and we have brains, and we have we're prone to laziness. We're prone to all kinds of things that observations from other fields can be helpful, can be leveraged, can be useful, I think, for how can we, it's like if you're trying to start an exercise program, you don't just usually, it's good to pray, but you don't just pray. You maybe hire a personal trainer, and you sign up for the gym, and you read a book, and you get a blog, and you subscribe to some Twitter feed that reminds you. So how can we leverage all these different things so that our students, so that we're preparing them to develop habits, to get enough ability. I do think this is one problem in some schools, is you have to have enough ability that then you can keep going. I want my students to get up to 70 miles an hour, and then they can just keep going. If you only get people up to 30 and be like, have fun on the interstate, well, they're gonna give up, And I think that's like the biblical software approach to language, where you don't really get people using it sufficiently.
Right.
So
right. Yeah, it's interesting. So in the first episode, I talked to a second language acquisition expert, Paul Nation, and he actually said one of the biggest roles of the teacher is to teach students how to learn, and that's something that students, especially learning a language, it's different than learning other subjects. And for most people, well, I shouldn't say most, international students are different because they know in a lot of ways what it takes to learn a language more than, your average 18-year-old in America, right? Who will almost certainly only know English. But I think it's a big issue, actually, because people don't really know what it takes to become fluent in another language. And so then when they enter the classroom, they have unrealistic expectations. And they also, when they leave the classroom, they don't know, okay, how do I actually continue to progress, right? It's even, like you said, there's been a ton of research in the secular world on habits, and there's been a ton of research, for example, on memory. How do we, how do things stick in our brain, right? And, so like one of the things that Paul Nation talked about and that we incorporate in our software is like spaced repetition, and it's just really basic, right? That you need to see things over and over and over again at increasingly longer intervals to remember it. So that's how we should treat vocabulary. But if students aren't taught that in the classroom, then, there's a decent chance they're not just gonna like learn that later, right? If they don't develop those habits early. So I think that's a huge point. So I want to talk a little bit more about this pedagogy, some of the issues, right? So we've talked about how, I think some of I don't know if blame is the right word, but the responsibility of students continuing in Greek and Hebrew is just on the student, right? And some of it is on the teacher, or at least the teacher can help the student in just being able to develop habits or tools, or do certain things that would allow them to continue later on. So one of the things I think too is method, right? And this is, we talked about this earlier a little bit. So I was watching a talk you gave at the Linguistics and New Testament Greek conference in 2019. You talk about the problem of, you say, lock-in with New Testament Greek pedagogy. So can you explain what this concept is of lock-in and how it's related to biblical language pedagogy?
Yeah, lock-in, that's a term I borrowed from an economics podcast, I believe, if I remember correctly. And they were using it in reference to, I don't know how you say it, but the Dvorak keyboard, right? There's different, the people who study the way the typewriting keyboard is laid out, there's a way you could lay it out better so that it would be more efficient. We could actually all type faster, theoretically, or I guess even, they've done studies and it works. And you could even retrain people, and retraining them, you account for all that. Still, it makes sense to do it. But 99% of us will never do that because we're accustomed to this. We think, what? I'll type a little faster. It's not worth it. I'm not gonna. It's inconvenient. And so, well, that's doubly the case, I think, with Greek pedagogy. You've got the textbook you've used. Maybe it's the one you learned from. The structure of even how classes are taught in a traditional seminary, 2 or 3 days a week for 50 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes or something. You also have the issue of, usually at most schools, you've got more than one person. So at our school, we have 6 New Testament professors. So even if I came to the conclusion, I think using reconstructed Koine or modern Greek pronunciation, maybe that would be better than Erasmian, with a little southern drawl added in. And if I were to change that, it would not make me a friendly colleague. Because my students would go into their class and it would not be ready, be confused. It would create tension. And it's just, as I mentioned, many things are, it's nice if you can do little nudges, for example, they've done studies, and if you just tell people, well, automatically we're going to increase your retirement contribution 1% every year. People don't notice it, everything, and pretty soon they're very generous contribution. It's good for everybody, right? At least changes are made. You can't be like, well, every semester I'm going to start, using 10% more reconstructed Koine. Now, I think you can do that somewhat with living language. Like, in other words, having like labs, increasing order of labs where you're interacting. You can have in the summer, hey, we're doing this 1-week camp for those who are more motivated to do this. I love language. I've loved language since I was a kid. I love, I've lived in different countries and I speak different amounts of different languages. I'm pretty comfortable speaking French. I can speak without I don't translate it. I just speak it freely usually, haltingly, but it's I understand what it means to think in another language and to speak freely in it. I can't do that with Greek because I haven't learned Greek, ancient Greek, as a spoken language. I do see I have some hesitations. I see some limitations of being able to do that for a language that's not living, and when your goal is not to just be able to live in a community of odd people, we're odd people, who want to speak ancient Greek, but your goal is to read and exposit the Bible. Mm-hmm. And you could say, well, that's really cool. I had a great week speaking Greek, but in this passage, there are, on this one page of text, there are 20 words that occur less than 4 times in the New Testament, and none of them I've used in speaking Greek. So you're not going to be able to read that passage as a living language, because those words are unknown to you, and it would be hard to imagine creating artificial environments with enough frequency where you could ever learn those words, sufficiently to really function well in them.
So do you feel like, I guess I'm not sure exactly how good you are at French. Do you feel like it would be helpful if you could, just in theory, like you could think in Greek
oh, absolutely.
the way you could think in French?
Yeah, if you listen to my talk, that's for sure. Having your brain wired to speak and think in a language is far superior. Yeah, I'm often reading and translating French when I use it. I'm not, but it's easier to read and translate because I can speak it. And I have done Latin. I've done Latin classes, with a living language approach, and I thought it was. I sat in on a colleague who does them very well, Tyler Flatt, who uses the Lingua Latina. I don't know if you've used that before, Orberg. It's very well done, very well done. And I used to, when I would go jogging, just listen to the stories. It's basically a series of stories, and I could jog for over an hour, and understand everything that was said. It was fun. I liked it. I enjoyed it. There were some drawbacks in terms of, there was a supplementary text that dealt more with grammar, that was helpful, that filled in some of the gaps that the storying type method did not. But yeah, I think that's great. If I were starting ancient Greek instruction from scratch, it did not exist, I would use living language and some of the more traditional textbook type grammatical. I would use it mixed. And I do think if I could trap students and be like, you're on my schedule, I don't care where you work or what, you're here. Sure, you doing a lot of communication would be fabulous.
Well, and I think just having this sort of thought in my head of you running, listening to these Latin stories, I think a lot of students would be thrilled to be able to run and listen to the Greek New Testament.
Oh, yeah.
With comprehension.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's the kind of thing that I think if we were to get them to that level as they exited seminary, I think you would have a much higher retention rate and less apostasy, right?
True. Yeah, I agree with you. And again, with resources like Biblingo and other sources out there, it's never, it's doable in terms of thinking about people being able to listen to the Greek New Testament easily and wherever they are, and even attend camps and other things to help them get more comfortable with that.
Yeah, and I think your point too. You kind of alluded to this is that really they're just not. You don't have to really choose, right? So if you were to start all over, you would do both, right? And I think that's what's important. You really need to know the grammar if you're going to open up a commentary. There's just no way around. You need to know what a genitive is, and you don't necessarily need to know what a genitive is to be able to speak Greek, right? You just need to know how to use the genitive, which is different.
And there's always a danger, I think. You're the communicative language guy, so I'm just come in. You can tell me what you think of this. Sure. I think there's always a danger with people doing the communicative. To do that well, you have to know the ancient text. It's very hard to really mirror the nuances of words and structure in a really faithful way. There's always the danger of creating a bit of an artificial grammar that leads people astray. So, anecdote, there was a guy once who was really in the communicative method in my class, Greek, hadn't studied with your material, some other organization, and we had, ace plus the accusative instead of the predicate nominative, which is very common in the New Testament, reflecting underlying Semitic structure. And he was totally, amazed by it. What is this? and you say, well, that's because he's learned what's normal is an artificial system that didn't actually reflect usage. It seemed to me. We're all growing in our knowledge. We all are limited, but to me, it flagged in the back of my mind a danger of if you have a communicative method that doesn't really reflect the syntax of the Koine period.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think it is kind of this. It's a tool that is very powerful, and then because it does actually get into your brain in a different way, like really deep seated, and so then when you come across the text and you see something that does seem odd to you, you have to ask yourself, is that because my reconstruction is wrong, or is that because like there is actually something weird about this text, right? And that's actually hard to parse out, because sometimes, I mean, even in the New Testament, it's not clear that we're always dealing with native speakers of Greek to begin with, right? So it's, and obviously there's variation in dialect in the New Testament, and varying levels of degree and register, and so all of those things, when we talk about reconstructing, we have to be really careful what register of Greek are we learning, right? Because it's a different animal. But I think those are, I mean, personally, I think those are important considerations that need to go into how we teach and how we reconstruct. But if we want to really get the paradigms and the structures, the syntax inside of us, like the living language approach, to me, really is the best method to do that. But and I think the hesitation that you give is exactly the reason why many people haven't adopted it.
Yeah, and I'm not against it. I'm against people who claim it's the cure-all, which I don't see Biblingo as being. People who think it's the only game in town, and they like to parade that through the street. But yeah, I think it has some real value. And as I said, I have not done that with Greek, but I have done it with Latin, which is very similar in the sense it's not a language that people are still speaking today. So it's somewhat artificially reconstructed the conversations and things, and it was a lot of fun. And it did wire it in my brain, not quite as well as French, because I think it's just because and just not many people you can sit around and have a conversation with in Latin, right?
Right.
And also, I studied French for several years, so had used it in different contexts in the U.S. and overseas, and so it's just an issue of fluency and the opportunity to speak it.
Right. So I want to just wrap up a little bit on your daily dose material. And so kind of one of the things we've been talking about, right, is how to get students to continue, right? So we've talked about, how the living language method might help with that. And obviously your big contribution here is the daily dose. And many people will know you as the Daily Dose of Greek guy. So can you give an introduction to what this is for those who may not have heard of it?
Yeah, the Daily Dose of Greek, and also the Daily Dose of Hebrew, Daily Dose of Latin, right? We have different platforms here. They're all free, and they provide a almost daily screencast. So you see when it comes up, it's a video of a screen that has text, and you hear the voice of the host speaking as they're marking up the text and reading it, translating it, and commenting on it. And we try to keep those videos to 2 to 3 minutes. And the goal is just to have a little free daily accountability. I like to call it micro-learning. It's a little bit of micro-learning, just trying to get a foothold of a habit in your life of reading the Bible in the original language, getting a little help, having a little coach there beside you to help you along. And so we have the website dailydoseofgreek.com. We also have, if we're just talking about Greek, we have Twitter feed at Daily Greek. It's on Instagram, Facebook. We have an iOS app. We have an Android app. And similarly for the Hebrew and the Latin, we have different platforms. We also have a Spanish language daily dose of Greek done by a native speaker from Panama, Spanish language daily dose of Hebrew, and a Korean daily dose of Greek, done by native scholars and speakers. And we're starting, Lord willing, this summer, we're starting a Portuguese daily dose of Greek and a daily dose of Aramaic by a scholar who's just written a textbook on Aramaic. So the goal of all these really is to draw Christians, especially Christian leaders, close to the Word of God, so that they're reading it in the original. Maybe we want them to do more than just 2 to 3 minutes, but it's pulling them close. So we want that knowledge and joy to spill over in preaching and teaching in other settings, and that to spill over to the congregation, a deeper love and knowledge of the Word of God to bring revival in churches and hopefully in society. We're about changing the world 2 to 3 minutes at a time in the biblical languages.
Well, and I think that's a great goal, and something that we often miss in the nitty-gritty details, of what kind of genitive this is why are we doing this? And I think that's at the end of the day, it's like it's fun and stuff, but the mission is higher, and I think that's great that you always keep that central.
We have a great time, and we have a lot of. I mean, we're not the host. We're not paid for this. We receive donations, and it covers. I hire an assistant about 20 hours a week who does a lot of the tech and posting, and so it covers that. Covers the technology. We're buying computers and audio equipment for people doing this. But the joy of doing it is better than money.
Yeah,
it really is. And I do believe, I tell some of our volunteers, trying to keep them fired up, but they're fired up already. I do believe in eternity, when we are able, I hope, to see what this has done and how it has helped other people in churches around the world. Our videos were watched in well over 100 countries last year, and over 2 million video views. And I hear anecdotally from people all the time, just telling me how they're helping them to stay in the Word of God and to love it more. I just, I think we'll have a joy of knowing that we helped and served people, and so it just makes me really happy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it's something that, as someone who's on the same team, I can rejoice over as well.
To get more people reading the Bible closely in English, but even better in the original biblical languages. What a joy, And as an example, I get these all the time. I got an email from a construction worker, and he said, I've always wanted to learn to read the Bible in the original languages, so I found your website, and I've been working on it, the lessons and then the videos for about 3 years, and now I like to sit down and read my Greek New Testament. And I'm like, yes, that gets me fired up right there. I love that. It's never, the technology, the tools, Biblingo, Daily Dose of Greek, they're out there. It's just a matter of people availing themselves of what's out there, and really just like flossing their teeth, like having an exercise program, like not wasting their life watching Netflix hours. It's making the right choices and then seeing over time the fruit of that.
Yeah, for sure. So as a way to close, you have an upcoming conference called Greek and Hebrew for Life. So can you tell us what this is all about? And we're actually going to be there as well. We'll be presenting, and we'll have a booth, I think. So what is, and this is for myself too, because I've never been. So what is the Greek
you think about, you've heard of Woodstock. Think about Woodstock for Greek and Hebrew nerds. And no, it's probably not going to be that big of a thing. But this is the third time we've done it, and it's a chance for people to come together who are interested in reading the biblical languages. And we're talking about homeschooling moms. We're talking about retired math teachers. We're talking about, most of them will be pastors and students, seminary students, Bible college students. And we have all kinds of stuff, everything from, like you guys, talking about communicative language and how to use that. The Olive with Beth will be there. Either video or in person. We're not sure because they're in Mexico. I'm not sure how COVID's going to work. But, and then we've got some sessions on more grammatical aspects. I have a doctoral student who's going to present a very helpful session on Greek periphrasis, the periphrastic construction. What is the nuance of that? We'll have another guy who's doing a session on, he's doing on how to learn to read to ancient papyri. So you want to learn to read the script. You want to learn to decipher it. How do you do that? We've got some guys from SIL talking about Bible translation and the need for that and how do languages fit with that. So yeah, just all kinds of stuff, from learning it better to using it. I mean, it's a festival of people reading and using Greek and Hebrew, and it's a lot of fun. And we give away, I mean, we're pouring, just speaking for the Daily Dose and the seminary together here, we're pouring a lot more money into this than we're taking in. I mean, every person who, up to the first, I guess it caps out at 200, but we're saying the first 175 people who show up, they're going to get in their bag over $140 of Greek and Hebrew resources, right? And we're going to give away lots of fun stuff. We're giving away full sets of Egg and Tea, full sets of Baylor Handbook that are out. We're giving away lots of stuff, and then the Greek and Hebrew review courses are the week before that. So Dr. Howell does a Hebrew review course July 26th through the 30th. I do Greek review July 26th through 30th. The conferences starts middle of the day, July 30th through middle of the day, the 31st, basically noon Friday to noon Saturday. And but the review course is a way for people to get their engine back up to speed. Lots of translation, lots of review, lots of camaraderie and group work, and it's a lot of fun. Last time I did Greek review, we had about, I'd say, almost 100 people in there, and some of them had even come from Great Britain, and it was like a Greek cruise. I mean, we were having a ball, and people were so excited about the progress they made in 1 week. You probably have seen something similar through the things you've done. It's a lot of fun to help people. And so, yeah, I'd love if you search for SBTS events, might be the easiest way to do it. Southern Baptist Theological Seminary events, SBTS events. It should come up as one of the main events that's featured there, the conference. We'd love to have, as long as, it's over half full now, but as long as there's space, we'd love for people to join us.
So it'll be at SBTS.
At Southern Seminary at the end of July, in person. Everyone keeps begging, can you go live stream? Can you? No. We're sick of live streaming. Yeah. Okay, let me just tell you like it is. I'm sick of Zooming. I'm sick of live streaming. No, we're going to go in person. We're going to follow whatever health guidelines are in place, although I anticipate, I could be wrong, but I anticipate it being very normal. Yeah.
Well, with that, we should probably get off Zoom because we've been on long enough.
It's okay. Yeah, this was my Zoom purgatory for the day.
Great. So, that's all we have time for on this episode of the Biblical Languages Podcast. Thank you, Rob, for joining us.
Glad to be here.
And thank you to all of our listeners out there who have taken the time to listen to the Biblical Languages Podcast brought to you by Biblingo. We hope you enjoyed the episode.